She learned about the transfer at dawn when the lights came on too early and stayed on too long. The guard did not explain anything. He did not need to. He slid a thin folder across the metal table and told her to stand. The folder had no seal, no stamp, and no clear reason for what was about to happen. Her name was not written on it. Only a number she had never seen before. She had been in holding for weeks by then. Long enough to learn the sounds of the building and the habits of the people inside it. Long enough to know that transfers usually came with notice, or at least paperwork. This was different. This was rushed and quiet, like something no one wanted to discuss. They did not allow her to gather her things. She was escorted through hallways she had never seen before, past doors that required more clearance than usual. The air felt colder the deeper they went. Cameras followed every step, but no one spoke. When she tried to ask where she was going, the guard told her to save her breath. The vehicle waiting outside had no markings. No license plate she could read. The windows were dark, darker than normal. Inside, there were no seats, only a narrow bench and straps meant to keep someone still. The ride felt longer than it should have been. She tried to count the turns, the stops, the changes in road sound, but it became useless after a while. At some point, she realized that was the idea. When the doors opened again, she was somewhere else entirely. The building looked unfinished from the outside. Concrete walls, no signs, no flags. It could have been a storage site or a forgotten warehouse. Nothing about it suggested people lived or worked inside. Yet the security was tight. Armed guards, silent scanners, layers of locked entry points. Every step inside required approval from someone she could not see. They took her belongings without listing them. They took her watch and her paperwork and the ring she had refused to remove until now. They took even the loose thread she kept tied around her wrist, a habit from years ago. When she asked for a receipt, the guard laughed. "Nothing comes back from here," he said, not cruelly, but like stating a fact about the weather. The cell was smaller than the last one. No window, no clock. The light buzzed faintly, never fully bright, never fully dim. The bed was bolted to the floor. The walls were smooth and blank, the kind that did not hold marks even if you tried. The door closed with a sound that stayed in her chest long after it echoed away. She waited for instructions. None came. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time was impossible to measure now. Meals arrived without pattern, sometimes too close together, sometimes with long gaps between. The food was plain and cold. Enough to survive, not enough to enjoy. Each tray was collected without eye contact when guards did speak. It was rarely useful. "So this is where you ended up," one of them said once, leaning against the door as if amused. "Didn't think you'd make it this far?" Another time someone asked if she missed the outside. When she didn't answer, he smiled and said, "Don't worry. No one out there misses you." They called her by the number on the folder, never by her name. When she corrected them once, a guard shrugged and said, "Names don't matter here." She began to notice the tone. The way their words were chosen carefully, meant to sink in. They spoke to her like someone already defeated, like someone whose story was finished. When she stood straight or asked questions, they mocked her for pretending she still had rights. During the first interrogation, there were 3 people in the room. None introduced themselves. They asked simple questions in circles, the kind she had already answered before. When she asked what she was being held for, one of them smiled and said, "You'll figure it out." The chair was uncomfortable by design. The room too bright, the questions too slow. They watched her face more than they listened to her answers. At one point, one of them leaned forward and said, "Do you know where you are?" She said she did not. "That's the point," he replied. After that, the mocking became more open. Guards joked within earshot about how long she might last, about how people like her always thought someone would come looking. One of them said she should practice telling her story to the wall, because it was the only thing that would listen. They never hit her, never left visible marks. Everything stayed just inside the line. Long hours standing for no reason. Sleep interruptions. Lights flicked on and off. Silence stretched until it felt louder than shouting. It was pressure without fingerprints. What unsettled her most was how organized it all felt. The routine of confusion, the careful balance between neglect and attention. Someone had designed this place to erase people slowly. She realized then that this was not a mistake. This was not a clerical error or an overreaction. Someone had approved this. Someone important enough that no one questioned it. The guards followed rules that were not written anywhere she could see, but everyone seemed to know them. She heard the word commander for the first time during a shift change. 2 guards were talking, unaware she was listening. Commander wants the schedule adjusted, one said. For her, the other asked. For everything, came the reply. He doesn't like loose ends. The word stayed with her. She never saw this commander, only the effect of his presence. Interrogations would be delayed, then rushed. Rules would change overnight. Guards who mocked her one day would avoid her eyes the next. It felt like the building itself was reacting to decisions made far above her reach. Once, during a medical check that was little more than a formality, the person taking notes paused when she gave her background. Just for a second. Enough to notice. You sure? The person asked quietly. Before she could answer, a guard cleared his throat, and the question was not repeated. That moment told her more than any interrogation had. Whatever reason they claimed for holding her did not match who she was or what she had done. And that mismatch made them nervous. Not enough to release her. Enough to keep her buried. The mocking returned, sharper this time. You really thought that mattered? A guard said when she mentioned her past work. Out there, maybe. In here, you're just a problem. Another guard asked her why she kept standing so straight. You think dignity works like armor? He said. This place eats that. She noticed something else too. When she stayed calm, when she listened more than she spoke, the guards slipped. They revealed frustration. Not with her, but with the situation. With orders they did not understand, but were told not to question. She began to understand her role in this place. Even if she did not yet know the full reason, she was not there to confess. She was there to disappear. The realization did not break her. It focused her. If the goal was to erase her, then staying aware was an act of resistance. She memorized voices, noted routines, watched for changes. She kept her thoughts organized even when the days blurred together, and still the mocking continued. As if they needed her to believe the same lie they were telling themselves. No one will ever hear this. One guard said during a late-night check. You could scream for years. She met his eyes and said nothing. The guard looked away first, by the end of what she guessed was the first week. She understood one clear truth. This Blacksite was not built for justice. It was built for silence. And the silence was protected by people who believed they were untouchable. Somewhere above her, behind layers of walls and authority, a commander was making sure of that. She did not know his name. But she knew now that her presence here had meaning. And meaning, even buried, had a way of surfacing. The transfer had not erased her. It had only placed her where the truth was most dangerous. The second phase began quietly, almost gently, which made it worse. After the shock of arrival faded, the place settled into a rhythm meant to wear her down. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just small, steady acts that chipped away at a person's sense of self. The guards no longer acted surprised to see her. She was part of the background now, like the walls or the lights that never fully turned off. They spoke around her, not to her, as if she were an object that happened to breathe. One morning, a guard slid the food tray through the slot and said, "Still here?" As if he had expected the cell to be empty. Another time. During a head count that made no sense since she was alone, someone muttered, "Thought you'd crack by now." They said these things casually, like jokes shared among coworkers. That was the point. The words were meant to feel normal. Interrogations changed too. The questions were no longer about facts. They became personal. Not deeply personal, but just enough to sting. "Who do you think you are, really?" one interrogator asked, leaning back in his chair. "Do you honestly believe you matter enough for all this?" Another asked why she kept insisting on being treated fairly. "You act like this is a misunderstanding," he said. This is where misunderstandings end. When she stayed quiet, they accused her of being difficult. When she answered calmly, they accused her of acting superior. No response was the right one. The mocking grew sharper when no one else was around. Guards commented on the way she spoke, the way she stood, the way she held eye contact. One said she sounded too educated for her own good. Another asked if she practiced being confident or if it just came naturally. They laughed when she asked for clarification. They laughed when she asked for legal access. They laughed hardest when she asked how long she would be held. "You still think in time?" a guard said once. "That's cute." She realized then that humiliation was not a side effect. It was a tool. The goal was not to scare her into talking. It was to shrink her, to make her doubt her own judgment, to make her feel foolish for believing she deserved answers. And yet for all their effort, they were careful. No shouting that lasted too long. No threats that could be repeated outside these walls. Everything stayed vague, wrapped in tone instead of action. This was a place that understood rules very well, especially the ones about what could never be proven. She began to notice that the guards rotated often, but the attitude stayed the same. It was taught, passed down, like a script. One afternoon, during a medical check that consisted of a quick look and a checklist, a guard stood by the door and watched her closely. "You don't look like the others," he said. She asked what he meant. He smiled and said, "You don't look broken enough." That night, the lights stayed on longer than usual. Sleep became something she had to fight for, not because of noise, but because of interruption. Just as she drifted off, the door would buzz. A voice would call her number. Nothing would follow. After a while, her body learned not to relax. During one interrogation, someone slid a file across the table. This one was thicker than the first folder she had seen. It had tabs and notes and pages she was not allowed to touch. "This is how you're described," the interrogator said. "Does this sound like you?" She asked to read it. He shook his head. "That's not how this works." She noticed then that they were no longer trying to learn who she was. They were trying to decide who she would be remembered as. If at all, the mocking shifted from casual to deliberate. Guards began repeating the same phrases. "No one believes people like you. You had your chance out there. This ends one way." When she challenged those statements, even gently, they accused her of being in denial. One guard told her she should be grateful. "Some people disappear faster," he said. "At least you get to breathe." The word disappear echoed in her mind long after he walked away. She paid attention to the small details. Which guards avoided her eyes? Which ones lingered a second too long? Which ones lowered their voices when certain topics came up? She noticed that whenever she mentioned her previous work, the room shifted. Not anger, not fear. Something closer to discomfort. Once, an interrogator asked her to repeat where she had been stationed years ago. When she answered, his pen paused. "Say that again?" said she did. He nodded slowly and moved on, but his tone changed after that. Less mocking. More controlled. That inconsistency told her something important. The ridicule was not because she was weak. It was because she was inconvenient. One evening, during a guard change, she overheard two voices arguing quietly. "She's not supposed to be here this long," one said. "That's above us," the other replied. Orders came straight down. "From who?" There was a pause. "You know from who?" They noticed her then and fell silent. The word commander returned to her thoughts. She still had not seen him. No footsteps she could identify. No voice over the system. But his presence shaped everything. Decisions appeared without explanation. Rules bent and straightened based on moods she could not predict. When guards mocked her now, it felt rehearsed, like they were reinforcing a story someone else had written. During one interrogation, she was asked why she thought she was special. She answered honestly, "I don't." That seemed to irritate them more than any argument could have. One of them leaned forward and said, "Then why do you keep acting like the truth matters?" She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady. "Because it always does," she said, "even when you hide it." The interrogator stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and ended the session early. After that, the mocking returned with more force. Guards began calling her professor, or hero, in a tone meant to sound playful, but carried an edge. They asked if she was planning to write a book. They asked if she practiced speeches in her cell. One said, "You should thank us. We're the only audience you'll ever have." Despite it all, she noticed something else growing beneath the surface. Tension. Orders were changing too often. Schedules shifted without warning. Some guards were reassigned suddenly. Others vanished from rotation without explanation. This place, so controlled on the surface, was reacting to pressure. She did not know where it came from, but she could feel it. One morning, a guard she had never seen before brought her food. He looked young, unsure. When he slid the tray through, he hesitated. "They talk about you," he said quietly. She asked who. "Everyone," he replied. "They say you're trouble." She asked why. He shook his head. "They never say just. Be careful." It was the closest thing to kindness she had received since arriving. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She understood now that the mocking served two purposes: to weaken her and to reassure them. If they could laugh at her, they could believe she posed no real threat, but the effort they put into that laughter betrayed them. People do not mock what they are certain cannot hurt them. They mock what they fear might still speak. She did not yet know what secret sat at the center of this place. She did not know how she was connected to it. But she knew this much. The commander did not want her respected. He wanted her dismissed, and that meant, somewhere beneath the layers of concrete and control, there was something he could not afford for her to say out loud. She started noticing patterns that were never meant to be seen. At first, it was subtle, tiny inconsistencies in the schedule. Doors opening and closing at odd times, whispers that faded the moment she drew near. She was alone most of the day, but the human brain does not forget to observe. She began to watch, to remember, to connect the fragments that others left behind without realizing it. It began with the guards. Every rotation had a rhythm. Some arrived slightly early, some late. Some lingered too long, speaking in low tones to someone beyond the walls. Others avoided certain rooms altogether. She memorized their movements like a map. It was not entertainment, it was survival. During meals, she began to overhear snippets of conversation. Not direct threats, not clear orders, just fragments. He said no witnesses. Not yet. It could leak if. One voice paused and muttered something she could not catch, then barked at the younger guard to focus on routine. These fragments were small, but they told her the Blacksite existed for more than containment. She realized the interrogators were no longer trying to find her guilty. They were trying to gauge what she knew. Every question, every angle, every hint of mockery carried a purpose. If they could make her talk, even accidentally, they could measure the damage she might cause. One afternoon, she was brought to a different room. No cell, no doors closing behind her. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a folder. She was told to sit. The interrogator's tone was calmer than usual, almost hesitant. "Do you remember your last assignment?" he asked. She did. She answered carefully, naming people and places, dates and routines, avoiding anything sensitive or speculative. He nodded. "Do you remember interacting with?" He paused, scanning the folder. "People who were later involved in classified operations?" She hesitated. She remembered, but hesitation was dangerous. So she gave only facts. He took notes slowly, deliberately, and finally leaned back. "You've been very precise," he said. "Almost too precise." That phrase lingered in her mind long after she returned to the cell. It was the first hint that they were paying attention to more than just her reactions. They were measuring accuracy, relevance, potential exposure. She was not just a detainee. She was a variable in a much larger equation. Over time, she began noticing small mistakes in the guards' routines. One door remained unlocked longer than usual. A log was left open on a console. Paperwork left unattended for seconds too long. At first, she dismissed it as coincidence. But repetition proved otherwise. She began recording these details in her mind, creating mental notes of who was careless, who followed protocol too strictly, and what could be overheard or observed. These observations became her tool. The Blacksite was designed to erase people, but erasing them also required consistency. And consistency, no matter how strict, always has cracks. Then, she had her first accidental encounter with the commander. She did not see him fully, only the edge of a uniform and a shadow passing a doorway. But he paused. Just for a second. Long enough for her to feel recognition in the stance of his shoulders. He knew she was there. He knew her name. The realization was small, almost insignificant. Yet it made everything click. This was not random. This was intentional. Her transfer, her isolation, the mocking, it all had a purpose. Someone in power wanted control over her knowledge. She began reviewing memories of her past work, trying to understand why she mattered to someone she could not yet name. Small details that once seemed irrelevant now felt connected. Conversations she had overheard years ago, locations of meetings she had attended, the people who had whispered warnings in corridors. Things she had once dismissed as background noise became clues. In the meantime, the Blacksite intensified its methods of control. They did not increase violence, they refined psychological pressure. Lights flickered unpredictably. Meals were inconsistent. Guards rotated rapidly. Random interrogations became exercises in disorientation. She had to think fast. She had to pay attention. One night, a young guard left a tray and lingered near the door. He did not speak at first, just watched. When he finally did, it was almost a whisper. "They say, you notice things," he said. She did not answer immediately. His eyes darted nervously, People notice, he added. Some of the higher-ups, they're worried you might. He trailed off, aware that even his words could be dangerous. She thanked him silently with her eyes. He left quickly, leaving her alone with more questions than answers. That encounter made her realize that fear worked both ways. The guards who mocked her were not fearless. They were instruments of someone else's fear. And fear, no matter how well masked, always leaves traces. The Blacksite's environment itself became a source of information. She noticed patterns in when guards ate, when doors were checked, when surveillance cameras were rotated. These details, combined with snippets of conversation, painted a picture of a system that had weaknesses, gaps, and human errors. She began testing those weaknesses carefully, observing quietly, speaking only when necessary, recording facts, mentally. Each small observation became a thread she could follow. Each thread hinted at a larger truth. Then came the first hint of direct interference from the commander. A schedule change she had memorized was suddenly altered. A guard she had watched for weeks disappeared without replacement. Another was assigned to unusual hours. These shifts were not random, they were calculated, precise, and designed to influence what she could see or learn. She started keeping mental notes on these shifts, patterns and deviations. The Blacksite was like a puzzle. Each movement, each rule, each lapse carried meaning. And someone very high up the commander was orchestrating it. During one particularly long session, the interrogator asked about a project she had worked on years ago. As she answered, she noticed his pen paused more than usual. He made a note, then looked up at her differently, almost cautiously. "You are aware of more than we expected," he said carefully. She did not reply. Her silence, as always, was a shield. The acknowledgement of her knowledge shifted something in the facility. The mocking that had been constant now became inconsistent. Some guards smiled less often, some spoke more softly, some seemed to avoid her gaze. The tension was subtle, but palpable. It became clear that her presence in the Blacksite was not just about containment. She represented a variable they could not fully control. And in the hierarchy above the walls, that variable was making powerful people uneasy. She began piecing together her own role in the larger picture. She remembered confidential conversations, distant warnings, and obscure references that suddenly aligned with the details she observed inside the Blacksite. It was like a puzzle she had been assembling unconsciously. Now all the pieces were visible at once. Her mind worked in a new rhythm, alert, calculating, observing. The Blacksite tried to break her spirit, but it also provided her with the clarity to see patterns no one expected her to notice. One evening, she overheard two guards arguing quietly near a security panel. "She notices too much," one said. "Commander says we keep her here anyway," the other replied. "Orders are orders." They were unaware she had heard them. She stored the words carefully. They confirmed what she already suspected. The commander was aware of her abilities and had deliberately kept her here. Not as punishment, but as control. She realized then that the Blacksite's power did not come from walls, doors, or guards. Its power came from secrecy. And secrecy, as she had learned, could be broken. The accidental glimpse of the commander, the pauses in interrogation, the inconsistencies, and the fragments of conversation were all signs. He had a secret, and she, though trapped, was beginning to understand its edges. The mockery, the isolation, the disruption, they were designed to make her feel insignificant. But it had the opposite effect. They had underestimated her ability to observe, to connect, and to retain. By the time she returned to her cell that night, she was no longer only surviving. She was gathering knowledge. She was connecting dots that others believed she could not see. And she knew, with growing certainty, that the moment she understood the full picture, the commander's carefully constructed world would begin to unravel. It was a slow realization, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew with every day spent in the Blacksite. The mocking had a pattern. The guards' rotations had a pattern. The interruptions, the conversations, the pauses, all of it had meaning. And meaning, she knew, was the first step toward truth. She lay on the hard bed, listening to the hum of the lights above, and understood something crucial. They had brought her here to be broken. Instead, she had begun to see clearly. She was not just a detainee. She was an observer. She was a witness. And somewhere deep in the chain of command, the commander's secret was vulnerable, and she was starting to find the edges. Days in the Blacksite blurred together. But slowly a truth began to take shape. It was not announced. It was not obvious. It came in small pieces, glimpsed in hurried conversations, fleeting gestures, and moments when guards forgot to speak in code. She realized that the Blacksite existed not to punish her, but to hide something far bigger, a network of operations no one outside this place could know about it. It started with a file that had been left out for a few seconds. A rare mistake in a facility that ran on precision. She caught a glimpse of documents stamped classified and internal use only, with names and locations that did not match her supposed offense. Her heart raced as she pieced together what the files implied. This was not about her. This was about someone trying to cover up actions that could ruin careers, destroy reputations, and even put lives at risk. She began noticing patterns in how the guards acted when certain words were mentioned. There was a phrase, repeated softly among the senior staff, that made them tense whenever it was said near her. One word alone was enough to change the atmosphere in a room. That word seemed to be linked directly to the commander's oversight. It was a thread leading straight to him. During interrogations, questions became less about her and more about what she might know. They asked about past colleagues, distant projects, and conversations she barely remembered. Each question was a test, measuring whether she could piece together information that might expose the hidden operations. One guard, clearly uncomfortable, muttered under his breath, "She knows too much." Another guard shot him a look, but it confirmed what she suspected. She was no longer just a problem. She was a threat. Then came a rare moment when she saw the commander in person, though briefly. He did not enter the room. He simply appeared at the edge of a corridor, his presence commanding immediate attention. Guards straightened, whispers stopped, and even the lights seemed to dim slightly, as if acknowledging his authority. He glanced toward her and paused for a heartbeat too long. Recognition, concern, perhaps even fear. That small moment told her everything. The commander had something to hide, and she, whether he realized it or not, could uncover it. She began connecting her own experiences to events in the past that she had once thought irrelevant. Conversations she overheard years ago, reports she had filed. People she had met, they suddenly formed a pattern that linked directly to what the Blacksite was hiding. She realized that her knowledge, combined with her observations inside, could expose what the commander was trying to keep secret. The Blacksite tried to suppress her. But it was no longer just about fear or isolation. Now there was tension among the staff. Guards who had mocked her before were more cautious. Interrogators spoke more carefully, choosing words that could not be misconstrued or remembered incorrectly. The commander's influence, once absolute, seemed strained. Something was shifting, though she could not yet tell what. One night, she was left alone in the cell with only the faint hum of the lights. She reviewed everything in her mind, the snippets of conversation, the repeated phrases, the schedules, the mistakes. She realized that this place, designed to erase her, had inadvertently given her a map of the commander's secret. Every procedure, every rotation, every act of mockery had left clues if one knew how to observe. The next day, during an interrogation, the questions took a subtle turn. Instead of mocking her directly, the interrogator asked about details that seemed unrelated at first, but, when pieced together, hinted at the operations hidden behind the Blacksite walls. She answered carefully, revealing only facts without interpretation. Each answer was a puzzle piece, and she could see the discomfort in the interrogator's eyes as he realized she was connecting them faster than expected. The commander's secret began to surface in small, almost imperceptible ways. Guards whispered about protocol changes they did not fully understand. One mentioned a directive that bypassed standard procedure entirely. Another hinted at a meeting the commander had attended personally, something that should not have involved people at her level. She noted every detail mentally, weaving them into a larger understanding of what had been hidden. There were moments when fear tried to take hold, especially during long interrogations where the questions circled endlessly. But fear was no longer the only force shaping her. Awareness was. Every observation, every note memorized, every pattern detected strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just surviving the Blacksite. She was learning it, understanding it, and preparing for the moment when knowledge would matter more than silence. One afternoon, a young guard brought her a tray and lingered at the door. He spoke quietly, almost hesitant, as if unsure of the consequences. "They're worried," he said, glancing at the corridor outside. "Higher-ups. The commander. They're worried what you might know." She did not respond. His words were confirmation enough. Fear alone had not kept the commander's secret safe. Awareness, and perhaps someone who could connect the dots, threatened it by now. She had memorized routines, rotations, and procedures. She understood who had access to what information and when. Small errors, repeated patterns, and whispered conversations had revealed a map that no outsider could easily follow. The Blacksite, designed to contain, had instead created an environment where knowledge could be gathered if one paid attention. The mocking, which had once been constant, began to feel almost frantic in its repetition. Guards seemed aware that she noticed more than they expected. Questions were sharper, comments more pointed, but also more careful. The atmosphere had shifted subtly. The commander's influence, absolute in appearance, was now measured, restrained. The fear of exposure had begun to leak into the controlled environment he had built. Then came a turning point. During a routine check, a document was left unattended for a few minutes. She glimpsed enough to confirm what she had suspected. The Blacksite was covering operations that violated rules at multiple levels. The commander was personally implicated, and her observations and knowledge had the potential to expose him. She realized the danger. This was no longer about psychological pressure or humiliation. This was about a secret that could destroy powerful people. Her presence, previously a nuisance, was now critical. She had become a threat to the commander's carefully constructed narrative. From that point on, she moved with deliberate caution. Each word spoken, each reaction noted, each observation recorded in her mind became part of a strategy. She would not act recklessly. She could not. But she would not be erased either. The Blacksite, with its walls, lights, and rotating guards, had revealed its weakness. People make mistakes. They speak in fragments. They leave traces of the truth even when they try to hide it. And she, attentive and precise, had begun to collect every trace dot in her cell that night. She lay awake, reviewing the pieces she had gathered. The mockery, the rotations, the whispered conversations, the small errors, they all pointed to a single conclusion. The commander's secret was not just a rumor or a shadow. It was real and it was vulnerable. She understood now that her role in this story was no longer passive. She was a witness, an observer, and a collector of truths that others had tried to bury. And while the Blacksite's walls confined her physically, they could not contain what she had seen, heard, and remembered. The realization gave her a strange sense of calm. The commander's power, which had seemed absolute, now had limits. The secrecy he relied on was fragile. The very measures he had taken to control her had created the opportunity for exposure. She was trapped, yes. Isolated, yes. Mocked, yes. But she was also beginning to see clearly, and clarity, she knew, could be as dangerous as any weapon in the right hands. Every day after that, she observed more carefully. She connected more dots. She noticed when guards hesitated, when schedules were adjusted, when someone whispered too long before speaking. Each detail was part of the map she was constructing. A map that pointed directly to the commander's secret, and somewhere deep inside. She understood that the moment would come when knowledge mattered more than silence, when observation mattered more than fear, and when the truth could no longer be hidden. Until that moment arrived, she watched. She listened. She remembered. And she waited. The commander had built a fortress of secrecy, but every fortress has a weakness. And she had begun to find it. The day she had been waiting for arrived quietly without warning. There was no dramatic announcement, no blaring alarms, no doors thrown open. The Blacksite continued to hum with its usual rhythm, the flickering lights, the rotating guards, the distant echoes of footsteps. But she knew something had shifted. She could feel it in the way the staff moved, the way they spoke in hushed tones, and in the unusual stillness of the corridors. It started with small signs. A guard who normally mocked her approached hesitantly, holding a tray. He avoided eye contact, but spoke in a voice lower than usual. "There. Changing things," he said, barely above a whisper. "Orders came down today. You're being released." She did not respond immediately. Her mind raced, trying to understand if this was a trap or a real shift. She had learned too well that nothing in this place was simple or straightforward. Over the next few hours, changes became obvious. Schedules she had memorized were altered. Doors that had always remained closed were now open. Security routines shifted. Even the interrogations slowed, the questions less frequent and less pointed. Something above the usual chain of command had intervened. Her release was quiet. There was no ceremony, no explanation, and certainly no apology. She was handed back the items they had taken: papers, personal belongings, the watch she had refused to part with, but not everything. Some things had been destroyed or confiscated permanently as she walked through the corridors. Escorted by the same guards who had mocked her for weeks, she noticed subtle glances exchanged between them. There was relief in some eyes, apprehension in others, and a tension that seemed to follow them all. She realized then that the Blacksite was not simply an isolated place. It was a network of power, fear, and secrets. And she had just survived the eye of the storm. Outside, the sun felt too bright, almost unreal after the dim, buzzing lights of the facility. She blinked against it, tasting air that had been denied, free movement that had been restricted, and the ordinary sounds of the world: birds, wind, distant traffic. It was overwhelming in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. She was not celebrated. No one outside the facility knew she had been there. No one applauded her return. She was just another person stepping back into the world. Carrying the weight of what she had seen, heard, and remembered, her mind immediately turned to the commander. She understood fully now why he had been so careful. He had hidden actions that could have ended careers, destroyed lives, and damaged institutions. He had relied on fear, isolation, and psychological pressure to protect his secrets. But she had learned the truth. Truth has a way of slipping through even the tightest controls, the evidence she had unknowingly retained, became her shield. Every memory of a conversation, every observed error, every detail of routines and rotations was stored carefully. They could not erase what she remembered. And that knowledge gave her power even in silence, in the days following her release. She began to see the ripple effects of her presence in the Blacksite. Changes occurred in the staff she had observed. The command structure shifted, certain individuals reassigned and protocols rewritten. The commander's authority, though still intact in title, had been weakened. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention, but it was real. She did not seek revenge. She did not go public. She knew the world outside did not need to see every detail of the secret she had uncovered. Some truths are too dangerous to shout, but she used her knowledge wisely. By remaining aware, careful, and precise, she ensured that the commander's unchecked power was limited. People noticed her presence differently now. She moved quietly through her daily routines, no longer reacting to minor slights or mockery. She carried herself with a calm strength that came from surviving a place designed to erase her. It was a presence that could not be ignored, even without explanation. Sometimes, when she thought about the guards who had once mocked her, she felt a mix of pity and understanding. They had been instruments of a system that demanded obedience above conscience. Some were afraid, some were indifferent, and some were complicit. She remembered the ones who had shown small signs of humanity, like the young guard who had whispered that others were worried. Their fear had saved her in a way. As time passed, the Blacksite faded from the forefront of her mind, but it never truly disappeared. The experience had changed her permanently. She had learned to observe more closely, think more carefully, and understand that even in the most controlled environments, human error and human truth can surface. She returned to a life that appeared ordinary on the surface, but she carried the lessons of the Blacksite everywhere. Decisions were measured, alliances carefully observed, and actions taken with awareness of their consequences. She understood now that power is often hidden, and secrets are protected by fear. But knowledge, patience, and observation can reveal even the most tightly held truths. One day, she visited a quiet park, sitting on a bench as children played and adults walked past. She noticed how people unconsciously revealed themselves the quick glance, the slight hesitation, the tiny gestures that told more than words. She realized that the Blacksite had taught her to see the world differently. She could not unsee what she had learned, and she carried that clarity with her wherever she went. She did not boast about her experience. She did not seek attention. Instead, she used her awareness quietly, protecting herself and those around her, understanding that power and secrets often coexist, and that surviving requires patience, courage, and careful observation. The commander's secret was no longer safe. It had been exposed in subtle ways, through changes in operations and the cautious behavior of those still inside the system. He could no longer act with impunity. The fear that had once shielded him now worked against him, limiting his actions and weakening his control. Though she was free, she remained cautious. The Blacksite had taught her that freedom could be fragile, and vigilance was a necessity. She moved through the world with a quiet confidence, aware that the lessons she had learned were as valuable outside the walls as inside. Time passed, and the memory of the Blacksite became a silent part of her life. She carried no bitterness, only clarity. She understood that justice does not always come with recognition or applause. Sometimes, survival and awareness are enough. She never forgot the people she had observed, the moments of weakness and courage, the small errors that had allowed her to see the truth. They were part of the story that no one else would tell, but they mattered to her. Each detail, each observation, is a testament to the resilience of a human mind under pressure. In the end, she knew the Blacksite had not defeated her. It had tested her, shaped her, and taught her to see clearly. She had endured the mockery, the isolation, and the psychological games, and emerged with something the commander could not take: knowledge, awareness, and the quiet strength to move forward. She had survived the impossible, and in surviving she had ensured that the truth, however quietly, would find its way to the surface. The world outside went on, unaware of the battles fought in secret. But she carried the story within her, not for fame, not for vengeance, but for understanding. Some truths, she realized, are powerful not because they are shouted, but because they exist quietly in the minds of those who have seen and remembered. She walked on, step by step, aware, alert, and quietly unstoppable. The Blacksite had tried to erase her, but in the end, it had only revealed her strength. The commander's secret had been exposed. The balance of power shifted, and she had returned to the world, carrying the knowledge that awareness can be more powerful than fear, and truth more enduring than silence.